Louis Zech podcast about Malcolm X. Malcolm X, with the real name Malcolm Little, was born on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm X was an African American leader and a prominent leader in the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X was also recognized as an American Muslim minister and human rights activist. Malcolm X was an important figure because he was the second most influential person and leader after Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm X also advocated the civil rights movement and thought that Africans should just have the chance to go back to Africa. In Malcolm X's education, Malcolm was self-taught in both levels of high school education and college education. When asked by people, he would say he learned from his books. After the trauma of his childhood and after he served jail time, he got into reading and learning. Malcolm X was arrested 3 times. The first time at age 19 for illegally stealing and pawning his half-sisters for court. The second time followed for illegally mugging and Christians at gunpoint. And the third time arrest came when Malcolm X broke into a house in the Boston area. The Nation of Islam wasn't really popular until Malcolm X decided to help out and became a minister. Malcolm X also made the Nation of Islam grow from about 6,000 in 1955 to about 75,000 in the early 1960s.
African Americans, or so-called Negro. One of the reasons that it is bad for us to continue to just refer to ourselves as so-called Negro, that's negative. When we say so-called Negro, that's pointing out what we aren't, but it isn't telling us what we are. We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today.
One of Malcolm X's most recognizable speeches was called the Ballet or the Bullet, which was one of his greatest orations. 2,000 people attended, including some of his opponents who heard him speak in Detroit. Malcolm X began his speech by letting everyone know that he was still a Muslim, but he quickly added that he didn't intend to discuss religions or any other issues that divide African Americans. Instead, he was going to emphasize the common experience of African Americans of all faiths. Malcolm X referred to the type of black man in the scene of America today doesn't intend to turn the other cheek any longer, and warned that if politicians failed to keep their promises to African Americans. Malcolm joined the Nation of Islam and was a key contributor in the civil rights movement during 1950 to 1960. The members of the NOI were known for changing their surnames to X, so Malcolm dropped the little in his name for X. Malcolm is known for taking great lengths that people would rather not take to further the rights of African Americans. The Nation of Islam rejected a nonviolent approach of civil rights leaders. Malcolm broke out from the Nation of Islam in 1964, completed Haji the threats from Nation of Islam members, and he was assassinated in 1965. The civil rights movement advocated on behalf of integrations against segregation. The Nation of Islam favored separatism, so that's why Malcolm X disagreed to some aspects of the Nation of Islam. But when Malcolm X finally left the Nation of Islam, he decided to get involved in a human rights movement. Malcolm X was a radical critic of the civil rights movement under Martin Luther King Jr. His nonviolent integration strategy was particularly strong among blacks from the rural southern states and within the small black middle class, most of whom wanted to end racial segregation and gain a share in the American dream. For them, the north of the USA was still something like the promised land. They cherished the hope of finally being accepted by the whites. Malcolm X was quite different. He knew the black districts in the North, which were often characterized by poverty, and had grown up in them as Detroit Red. Malcolm X spoke for the African American slum dwellers of the North who no longer had any hope in white liberals because they had learned on their way from the plantations to the ghetto that there was no room on the white side for their advancement. When it comes to opinions, Malcolm X was the opposite of Martin Luther King Jr. He was encouraging African Americans to take up arms against the whites and organize the Black Panther Party for that sole purpose in mind. They promoted self-defensive ways under the Black Power movement that became known worldwide. Malcolm's Autobiography. Malcolm X began working on his autobiography in his early 1960s. The autobiography consists of his life, views on race, religions, and black nationalism. It was published in 1965 and became a bestseller. As part of accomplishments, his integrity, focus, and deep thinking that helped others say what they think. It makes him not afraid to speak up. He also proved to many people, even if we do something wrong, we need to own up our own mistakes and improve our character.